The first feeling can be one of kind of disorientation and dismay, perhaps. And you say, well, where's the tune? Or where's the hook, if you were talking about popular music? And this gets into kind of a complicated subject in a way, about how we hear music, and how we hear music that doesn't have recognizable melodic material. In fact, what I've discovered in the last 14 years that I've been playing with my ensemble is that people learn very quickly to hear music in another way. And they don't find it strange at all. It's only strange at the very, very outset. This last tour that we did in the States last spring, we did, I think, about 18 cities in 20 days, one of those kind of tours. And we were in Chicago and Detroit, Madison, Wisconsin, little places, big places, Minneapolis. Most of those places, the audiences were 1,000 to 2,000, and in LA there were 3,000. Then I just had a film shown at the New York Film Festival that was done. I did the music for the film, it's my film. It was at the Radio City Music Hall, which is 6,000 people. And that's an awful lot of people. Let me tell you, that's a lot of people. But that's very recent. But, you know, this whole thing has been very gradual. I think you have to put it in perspective of when we began playing as an ensemble in 1968, our first tours, when we were touring starting in 69 and 70, we played for 6 people, you know. And 2 of them were friends, and one was my mother. We did a lot of concerts in the early days in museums and galleries. That did change around 74, 75, and it's a more general audience now. It's a very wide age range. The LA audience, I remember, it seemed to me like a very young audience, and like in their early 20s. But there are people, middle-aged people, and sometimes older people too. In a way, you assume that the audience that you start off with will stay with you, and they do generally. You know, someone like Dylan has the same people that listened to him 20 years ago. They're still listening to him. But you assume that you'll always have those people that were... And there's a kind of I wouldn't exactly call it loyalty, but something similar to it, where people get... they identify with a certain kind of music, and they'll just listen to it all their lives. But the audiences start really growing when you start reaching beyond that group into a younger group, and then a younger group, and then a younger group. And that gets really interesting. a kid, serious music was really supposed to be played for a handful of people, 50, 60 people maybe, if you had that many friends. You know, and the idea that experimental music could be popular on a comparatively vast scale was just not even considered. And I think there's a certain amount of, just downright jealousy about that, you know. But this music after the Second World War, which was just so boring, you know. And we had to listen to it for so long. And they got stuck with it, you know. And then a bunch of people came along and said, well, we just don't want to listen to that anymore. I began studying music when I was 8. Not began when I was 6, actually, but I didn't get serious until I was 8. Then I became very involved with music. And I think I took my last music lesson when I was 28, so I had 20 years. It's really a long haul. I had written over 70 pieces, 4 or 5 string quartets and concertos and orchestra pieces and all kinds of stuff, garbage, a lot of it. But vocal stuff, all manner of things. I guess what really happened is at a certain point I felt that the music wasn't mine, that I felt I had to have my own voice. And I was kind of consciously covering ground in a way. And at a certain point I had gotten all this music behind me in a way, and I just kind of abandoned it, really. I didn't hear my own voice in it at all. I didn't have any trouble dropping it. It was a combination of kind of desperation and frustration, and I just hated the music that was all around me, and I just wanted to start someplace else. It was so heavy. The Stockhausen and Boulez trip still is. I mean, they're still there. We did a Beckett piece called Comedy. I remember this was 1965, and at that time it happened that I was also working with Ravi Shankar on a film score. It was his score, and this is in Paris. I was hired to notate the music, which was very interesting. I didn't know anything about Indian music at the time. I had to figure out how to take that music that he would play it for me, and I would write it down. And we had some studio musicians that were French musicians, and they had to read it. So it was the effort of translating it. I learned a lot about his music just in doing that. And I got the idea of working in a rhythmic structure rather than let's say a harmonic or narrative structure. One of the problems with this early structural music was that it took pages and pages of notation to write it out. What I used to do is I used to paste the music on the wall. It was just impossible. We tried everything. We even tried projecting the score on a screen. And I would change the page with a foot pedal. Yeah. But the trouble was that sometimes, you know, the slides don't work right. Sometimes I'll go backwards instead of forwards. So I'm going to have little accidents like that happen. I saw that wasn't going to work. But I had a notational problem, really, that I had not been prepared for, even though I had written a lot of conventional music. None of that had prepared me for the problem of notating my own music. And one of the interesting things about inventing a new music is that almost invariably you need a new notation to go with it. I've wanted to do was to have the repertoire of the ensemble be exclusive to the ensemble, so that, for example, when we play in a city like Houston or Boston or London for that matter, one of the reasons that we can come over is that there isn't anyone else playing the music. They've been playing with me for, some of them, 14 years, 12 years, 10 years. And the only way to keep that instrument, it's really an instrument.
Yes.
And to keep that instrument together, we do 20, 30 concerts a year just to be able to play well. And to have those people available, there has to be that much work.
Sure.
So it's a kind of a commitment.
Well, I think it was 67 or something. I met Philip, and he was just got back from India and France and stuff, and he was writing a solo saxophone piece, and Steve Reich introduced me to him. I'll say if there's no rehearsals, and I think I'd have to play about 3 concerts to really get into the pace, you know, to really get the endurance happening, so that I'm not, like, my lip isn't dragging at the end, you know.
We play everywhere, from regular concert venues to rock clubs, and we do that in a lot of cities. And there, of course, our answers are very different. First of all, they tend to play very late. So I won't play after 1 o'clock in the morning. I think it's just too late. Funny things will happen, like, for example, Michael Reisman, who plays opposite me, let's say he grabs 2 pages instead of 1, yes, turns the page, and bingo, he's 2 minutes later into the piece. I mean, it's just chaos. What we do, the rule is that we all follow, we have to follow someone. Yes. And as Michael's left hand is the most dominant rhythmic device of the music, we follow his left hand.
When I joined Philip's group, I found the discipline was quite difficult. It's like playing chamber music in that way. You really have to, everybody has to listen to everybody else. And I'm actually the center of the time, you might say, because being the player of the left-hand bass,
right. Like the string bass
keeps it all together, really. I had been playing around with repetitive structures myself in my own music, and I love to use music as a ritual of getting into rhythmic experiences that, you know, develop in the same method that Philip was using at the time.
People scream at you, they'll throw things at you, or they'll get on stage. I mean, you don't go with eggs to a concert unless you think you're going to throw them, right? I mean, I always took those as some kind of political act in a way. You know, you just didn't happen to have some eggs in your pocket. That happened, we were doing this piece with Lucinda Charles Dance, and it was someplace, where was it? I think it was in New York, in fact, and some people ran down and began throwing it. Actually, they hit the dancers, who weren't used to that. I mean, we had been shelled out for years, and it didn't bother us too much. And one poor guy got an egg on him. He just almost cried. He was just so unhappy about it. I felt badly for him.
When I perform the music, I'm not thinking in terms of emotions or feelings or anything. Mainly, I'm just trying to get it right. Basically, I sing in I'd say about an octave, a little more than an octave, which would be...
The G to G?
G, yeah. And Kurt doesn't really play around with the stuff while I'm doing it. I kind of adjust myself by, if I'm really, you know, sort of low in that range, I come right up, and if not, I go away. Like on the high B, I go, I sing it up there. Certain areas where the range is too high to really say anything but ooh or ah, I just say ooh or ah. You know, there's a section at the end of Flow, you know, and this is all very high, and I'm going fa la fa mi re na, and then it goes fa fa la la fa fa mi mi. I don't do that. I go ah 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 ah, because in that range it's just too hard, and particularly without having any place to breathe. When I do it staccato like that, I can go, ah, 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 ah. The main thing with Philip is accuracy of rhythm and pitch.
Where people scream, we get screamers. This isn't music, or this is or why are you doing this to me? And then they'll stay for the whole concert to remind you that they're there being unhappy about it. I mean, they could easily leave. So those things are always, that's more than just a dislike. There's an involvement in the dislike, which is kind of interesting, isn't it?
When I first started playing, I always thought, well, this would be a great music to have a singer singing over or something. And I hadn't, I've been basically involved with rhythm and blues music, so I was coming from that and wasn't aware of Eastern Indian music or drums or these type of things. So it was an opening of a complete new chapter in my musical development. What you're hearing in the audience is heavily amplified. It's acoustic music amplified as far as the horns go. We don't use pickups on the instruments because you have to go through an equalizing process, because the state of the art of pickups you get a tinny sound, you don't get the big round, nice, fat, warm sounds that you can get by playing through a mic.
We played at a college in New Jersey once, and at the intermission, I think we had our publicist with us, and he was in the audience, and he overheard one faculty member saying to the other one, "Don't they audition these groups before they hire them?"
It's maximum music out of a very short range of notes. That if you try to be too expressive with that, it's just it can get quite boring, I think. Let the music just hang by itself, just sort of a sustaining type melody. It's very haunting, that melody. Expression in his music is a little bit like adding salt to potatoes. You put in too much and it destroys the whole thing.
We had a big concert hall in the East Village of New York called the Fillmore East, and the big bands came and played there, like the Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, those bands, and they had terrific sound systems. And I got interested in the sound equipment and the kind of sounds that could be produced. And it was about that time, no, a little bit later, that I began working with Kurt Mankesi, and he began designing sound equipment for the ensemble.
I guess my position is kind of more than just a normal, sound engineer, since I produce the records, and actually it's kind of, I'm very integral to the whole sound. We basically kind of want, 6 or 7 instruments to have the impact of a 50-piece symphony.
it's not a music with clearly populist intentions. On the other hand, there's no doubt that this music has a far wider audience than you usually associate with new music. But then again, that's a question of historical period too. I mean, that was true in the past too. Verdi's operas sold out. We tend to look at music in complex ways. You can hear it, if you like. There are people that can hear it in terms of the process. But for that, you can hear Schubert that way too.
I think people now are used to being able to listen to very complex music. I mean, because of what's gone on with the modern recording technology and the Beatles and everybody, I mean, getting to add all these complex parts and record over themselves. So the music's quite complex at the end that people now are really, I mean, there was always the classical world that was used to listening to complex music, but now, I mean, everybody's used to listening to complex music.
The music proceeds from moment to moment in a way. It's a kind of a present tense music in a way, with someone described it without past and future. But in a way, it does have beginnings and middles and ends, but it's your, those usual kinds of, let's say, dialectic structures, I'm sorry to use such garbagey words, but, or like sonata form structures, they're simply not there. But it turns out there are a lot of other ways of doing it. I mean, after all, that's only one way of putting music together. And if we listen to the great traditions of world music, we find many other ways of doing it.
He's like truly a modern composer, because when he writes a piece now, he writes it for the recording studio as an instrument.
Yeah.
Not just, not just the music.
It makes sense. I mean, all of the great composers have used the technology of their time, and it seems crazy to use the technology of a previous era.
100 years ago.
Repetitive structures are a procedure, an alternate procedure to narrative procedures. That's really the whole of it. In fact, the music repeats literally very little. In the early works, we were called minimalists in those days, and here I think they called it systemic music here. The music was very structural. You heard very clearly the rhythmic structure of the music, and there was almost no harmonic movement, and the melodic material was very suppressed.
And it's very repetitive as well.
Well, that's still true, I'm afraid.
A lot of opera singers couldn't do it, I'll tell you that. I mean, you have to be able to keep your voice down also and do that real fast stuff. I mean, I guess the hardest thing is just the stamina, the not having a chance to breathe.
Yeah. So what do you do about that?
Just take them when you can, and, it's not even something I practice at home. I went on a big tour with Philip last April, and we performed almost every night. And by the end of it, I really could do it. It's something you have to learn by doing, because you can't do it at home because it's so different, when you're on mic and you have all this tremendous sound in your ear.
If you were trying to punch the notes out on the piano, you'd be forcing, whereas on the synthesizer, you can just float across and you let the fingers do all the work, and you get all the sound you need from your amplifiers.
I remember we did a concert once years and years ago in which for some reason, we're doing part 9 of music in 12 parts. I remember this clearly. And we got to one place, and somehow we all stopped. That almost never happens. And I picked up the beat at the next measure, and we started again. And afterwards, I discovered that less than half the people had heard us stop.
And I do take breaths. I mean, there is this thing, the organ going on. I mean, we do have to take breaths. John Gibson plays, as I said, circular breathing, but I don't do that. I take a breath when I need a breath.
You create an air pocket in your mouth cavity that is like a bellows or something, and you put that air through the horn while you breathe in through your nose and get a little more reserve air, so that it's just a coordination. Somebody's it's like doing one of those funny coordination things, whatever, you know. And but it's very handy.
I've circular breathed on clarinet before, but I only have one complaint about circular breathing as far as I'm concerned, and that is that when you're going through the process of doing that, and you've got the air inside your oral cavity and your neck, and that's all the air that's pushing the sound out, and you're breathing in through your nose to fill your lungs back up. The intensity of the sound of the horn drops. There's a slight drop in the sound, and I would rather just have the strength of sound the same all the time.
I use a large range of singing styles doing his music, and I don't really intellectualize it like now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that, but sometimes I sing very straight because the vibrato would just not fit, the music, and sometimes, like at the end of Einstein, I really let it wail, and when I do the numbers, I use a very sort of a light voice, What do you think about that one?
Yeah.
mean, some people like it because it's loud, some people like it because it's fast, some people like it because it's very classical, some people like it because it's very not classical. Some people like it because they think it sounds like Indian music, and some people like it because they think it doesn't sound like Indian music. It just depends, you know. But it has a lot to do with the ages of the people and what they're bringing to the music. And the whole development and evolution of popular music in the last 10 years has been enormously helpful for us. I mean, when I say us, I mean the ensemble.